Hello, folks. This is Professor Watts, and today we are going to talk about issues of unemployment and employment, a lecture I titled Measuring Labor Utilization, because as you'll see shortly, it's about much more than just the unemployment rate. There's several different ways of thinking about unemployment, then there's a few ways of thinking about measuring employment. And so we'll walk through about 6 or 8 different measurements that are useful for us in thinking about really how the labor market section of the economy is functioning. So let's dive in with some important definitions to start with. One, what does it mean to be unemployed? It's adults who are willing and able to work, so people who want to work but cannot find a job. Now, notice very importantly here right off the bat, this is not people who are out of work, okay? Because there are several reasons to be out of work and not all of them involve unemployment. You have to be looking for work and not able to get it, okay? Now, why could you be out of work? Well, think about it. I can list at least 3 reasons for not having a job, and 2 of them I'll suggest are probably good. One is that you're retired. Okay, I've built up enough wealth and I don't need to work anymore. I can maybe enjoy a life of leisure or different activities that don't pay me money. A lot of people aspire to this. That's possibly a very good thing. And as our society ages and as we get wealthier, there are many people in this status. So they are without a job but not unemployed because they're not looking for work. Then we've got a lot of people who might not be in retirement age, but nonetheless they don't want or need a job. We have a lot of stay-at-home parents, or just a lot of people who are maybe supported by someone else and they're pursuing other things that might be very important things. They just aren't on some company's payroll. So they're not unemployed unless they're looking for work. Now the final thing here is that you can't get a job and you want one. Okay, then you are unemployed, right? You are out of work and looking for a job, wanting a job. So that is a very important distinction that you need to be aware of right off the bat here. And that, I guarantee you, will be on our quiz for my macro students. You'll have several situations about a person who's out of work and you'll have to determine if that person's unemployed or not. Okay, now that we have the concept of unemployment nailed down, now we can talk about the unemployment rate. And this is where we'll start, although as I mentioned, we have several different concepts that we'll look at here involving labor utilization, unemployment, and employment. But let's start with the big one, the unemployment rate. And that is defined as the percent of the labor force without a job. And here's what the math looks like. So we take the number of unemployed and divide that by what's called the labor force. Now the labor force consists of the people who are unemployed plus all people who are employed. Okay, and then that's expressed always as a percentage. So multiply it by 100.
So let's look at the actual unemployment data, updating this for April 2024. I'm recording this in May. The data for unemployment comes out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics the first Friday of every month for the previous month. So we just got this April data at the beginning of May here. And here's how the numbers worked out. We had 6.5 million unemployed, employed total of 161.5 million. So that gives us a labor force of 168 million. You can see that's the sum of the unemployed plus the employed. Okay, unemployed at 6.5, employed 161.5. So unemployed divided by that total labor force, so that works out to 3.9%. Now 3.9%, that's low and historically still a very low number, but what we want to do is look at kind of the data over time and see where that's trending. Let's go to the source of this data because it'll show us kind of some previous months and years, and we can see what's happening with this over time. So I'm here at the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and we're looking at what's called the Employment Situation Summary. Here we have the April 2024 data, and it's looking back to March, it's looking back to February. So what's been happening with that unemployment rate? It's been pretty stable, 3.9, 3.8, back up to 3.9, but look at it over 1 year ago. So there's April 2023 here in this column. And it was down at a kind of an all-time low, almost a 3.4. So it has been trending up somewhat in the past year, and it'll be interesting to see if that keeps going up. There's some people who think that this might be heralding recession, but you can see all the broader data here. So the total civilian non-institutional population. Now, the current population of the United States is in the 331 million or so, and this is quite a bit lower than that. So this is the non-institutional population, which means it's people, excluding people who might be in prison or some kind of other institution. It also only counts adults 16 years and over, because children aren't really considered to be part of the workforce for these purposes. And it also excludes people in the military because they're not really available to do civilian jobs. So that's the basis of the population. And then you can see the labor force, the a little bit more precise number. We can see the participation rate, which is the labor force divided by the non-institutional population, the employed, the unemployed, the rate, and so on. And then you can see, if I scroll down here, you can see that they've got unemployment rates for all kinds of different demographic categories: men, women, teenagers, white, black, Asian, age groups, et cetera. And then we can look down here for reasons for unemployment, duration of unemployment, all kinds of data. So there's just a rich trove of data here and a really complete picture. And what a lot of economists who are trying to size up like where the economy is going, and we'll want to dig into these more nuanced categories here and look at these trends. So very important data and very useful for people who are trying to assess trends in the macro economy.
Okay, now before we move on and talk about refinements of the unemployment concept, we'll briefly discuss why unemployment is problematic. And we'll start at the individual level. Now, first off, we'll address that it's not necessarily a problem if it's just short term. People are looking for jobs and they're going to spend some time finding the jobs that are best for them. And that's really ideal. You don't want to just take the first job that crops up, because it might not be the right job for you. It might not match your skill set. It might not be the job you want the most. So short-term unemployment is generally not viewed as problematic. It's viewed as part of a normal matching process, matching the right workers to the right jobs. Long-term unemployment is where it gets troublesome for obvious reasons. You get into financial hardship due to loss of income. You get into maybe some psychological stress because you're without a job. Maybe you don't have a lot of purpose or motivation in life. And then there's the risk of becoming unemployable or lapsing into chronic long-term unemployment, because prospective businesses might wonder why you've been unemployed for so long. So that can be a severe problem for a very small subset of the unemployed. Then for the economy, unemployment's problematic because if we have high unemployment, we have a lot of people who want to be working and contributing to output, and they're not. So GDP could be below potential. And if unemployment is persistently high, that's a sign that something's wrong with your labor market. The labor market institutions are maybe doing a poor job of matching available workers to available job openings, and that could be a sign of kind of an unhealthy economy. And just to give you a quick example of that, we have unemployment at 3.5% in the U.S. Now that's very low. Most of that is short term, what we call frictional unemployment. Not a problem. But if you look at a country like Greece, and I don't mean to pick on them, I just be aware that they are a country with chronically high unemployment. They're currently at 18%, and they've barely been below 10% here over the past 30 years. So they have what we might call a chronically high unemployment rate, and that's an indication of maybe some dysfunction in their economy. You can see Germany here was at a similar high level, but they were able to get their unemployment down. They're now in the threes, just like we are in the U.S. But here's Greece stuck up here in the high teens. They've been as high as 27% within the past 10 years. So that is a symptom of possibly some problems in their broader economy. Now, here's a kind of a recap of the U.S. unemployment rate going back basically to the post-World War II timeframe, late 1940s. And as you can see, we have our highs and lows. So we spike during a recession, and then we go down. We spike, we go down. We have a very cyclical unemployment rate and a pretty low average. If you kind of visually draw a line through the middle of this data, you'll see it's in the 5 to 6% range. So low average, highly cyclical, characterizes the U.S. Expect to see unemployment spike again when we enter the next recession. It's only a question of when and how bad it will be. Okay, now we want to move on and talk about the unemployment rates. Little known fact that there is more than one unemployment rate. There's in fact 6 different unemployment rates. And when we talk about the unemployment rate, we're actually just talking about unemployment 3, U3, total unemployed as percent of the civilian labor force. So that's what we've been looking at, and you can see I'm highlighting that data. Here we are at 3.5% for February. Now, there are 2 unemployment rates that are kind of narrower, more focused concepts of unemployment. So U1, as you can see here, and again, I'm at the BLS website, persons unemployed 15 weeks or longer. So remember I had said that unemployment's not a problem if it's short term. So this one kind of factors out short-term people and only focuses on long-term people, and that is only 1.2% of the labor force. So there's a very small segment of the labor force that's in a long-term unemployment situation, and that's the trouble unemployment. And that's unfortunate that that's 1.2% of the labor force, but that's a very small amount of people overall. Okay, then we have U2, which focuses on job losers and persons who completed temporary jobs. So that's kind of a way of gauging people leaving employment involuntarily. That's at 1.7% of the labor force currently. Again, fairly low. Okay, U3, which we've discussed. And then as we go up to U4, 5, and 6, now we're talking about broader unemployment concepts. So U4 includes the unemployed plus what are known as discouraged workers as a percent of the labor force. Now, what are discouraged workers? Well, look down here to this note. It says discouraged workers, a subset of the marginally attached, have given a job market related reason for not currently looking for work. Okay, so these are people who ultimately do want a job, but they're not actively looking because there's some problem with their industry or their occupation, their training. Could be geographical, they're unable to get a job where they live, they've given up. So basically, discouraged workers are people who do want to work, but they've given up looking. So they're not included in official unemployment, because remember, those are people who are looking for a job. But when the concept is broadened a little bit, and the Labor Department knows this because they survey tens of thousands of people every month to collect this data. And so they'll ask them, are you working or not? And if people say no, the survey says, well, do you want to be working? And if they say yes, then they ask them, are you looking for a job? If they say no, then they're classified as discouraged workers. If they say yes, I am looking for a job, then they're classified as unemployed. So this kind of gets, this might seem like some hair-splitting differences. It gets pretty detailed and nuanced, but it's useful. We get a very broad set of data that helps us to size up what's going on out there. Okay, so we've got U4 including discouraged workers, and then U5 adds discouraged workers plus all other persons marginally attached to the labor force. Now, what does that mean? Persons marginally attached to the labor force, so those who are currently neither working nor looking for work, but indicate that they want and are available for a job and have looked for work sometime in the past 12 months. So the discouraged workers are part of the marginally attached, so you can think of the marginally attached are kind of a broader group of people who have given up looking for. Okay, so naturally when we add in discouraged workers and then the marginally attached, we're going to see the unemployment rate ticks up. Now, only a little bit, which is pretty good news because there's a very small group of discouraged workers. The unemployment rate only goes from 3.5 to 3.8. Not that big of an increase. If we add all the marginally attached, it just does go up to 4.4%. And then finally we have U6, which is the total unemployed plus all the marginally attached, so what we were capturing in U5, plus the total employed part-time for economic reasons, PTER. Now, what is PTER? Let's look down here at the note again. Persons employed part-time for economic reasons are those who want and are available for full-time work, but have had to settle for a part-time schedule. Okay, so think about people who are working part-time. Some of them want to be part-time because they have other obligations in their life. They don't have the time to commit to full-time work. Maybe they don't need a lot of income. In fact, there might be some people working part-time who really don't need the income. They might be on a pension or Social Security, but maybe they want to be out of the house and do something with their time, so they go and get a job, right? Those people we don't worry about. The people we might worry about are people who wanted full-time work, but they basically had to settle for part-time work because that was all they could get. That is what PTER means. Okay, so when we add them in as well as the marginally attached, we're going to see a pretty substantial increase in the unemployment rate. Now we're going from 3.5 to 7%. And some commentators will call this U6 the real unemployment rate. I think a good term for it is the underemployment rate. So it kind of captures the people who are officially unemployed plus people who are essentially unemployed but don't count as officially unemployed plus people who are underemployed. So that's the broadest possible unemployment concept you could look at. U6. All right, so we've got U1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, now let's look at some arithmetic of unemployment. And I want to work through this math. It's pretty simple math to demonstrate to you the importance of thinking about the unemployment situation in a broad context using more than one unemployment rate. So here's my data for Macroville, small economy, where there's these are all in, let's say, millions or thousands, doesn't really matter, but we've got 90 employed, 10 unemployed, which would mean a labor force of 100, right? Because the labor force is the total of the employed and the unemployed. So 90 plus 10, 100 in the labor force. And then we're going to have a certain number of discouraged workers, 2, marginally attached, 4, and remember the 2 are included in this 4 because they're a subset of the marginally attached, and then some part-time for economic reasons, PTER, 5. Okay, so we can calculate the unemployment rates. And I'm just looking at the main unemployment rate, U3, and then the broader ones, 4, 5, and 6. So U3 is just the unemployed, that's the 10 million, divided by the labor force, 100, so that's 10%, of course. U4, we add the 2 discouraged workers to both the numerator and denominator. So now we've got 12 over 102. Work that out on your calculator, or as we'll be doing in homework 3, you'll do that in Excel. So we got 11.7% for the U4 rate. Add in the marginally attached, and notice how this is all color coordinated so you can follow along. U5, we've got, add the 4 marginally attached, we've got 14, and add them to the labor force as well, so we've got 104. 13.5%. And then finally the U6. Now we're adding the marginally attached and the PTER people to the denominator, so they are the unemployed, but the labor force stays at 104, just adding the MAs. Why? Because PTER people are technically working, so they are in the labor force. They're just underemployed. So that's 104. So we got an unemployment rate now of 18.3. Broader unemployment rate, of course, is going to be higher than the narrow unemployment rate. Okay, now I want to give you some scenarios where the unemployment rate changes and we want to size them up. So here we have the unemployment rate going from 10 to 8.2. And we want to ask ourselves, is this good? Is this positive? Well, if you just looked at that raw number, you're going to be tempted to say, yeah, unemployment went down almost 2 percentage points. That's good news for the economy. But is it really? Well, let's look at the data first and say, what's happening here? There's 2 reasons for unemployment to go down. One is that unemployed people got jobs. The other one is that unemployed people gave up in looking for jobs. Okay, which one happened here? Well, look, the employed stays at 90, while the unemployed goes from 10 to 8. So where did those 2 million unemployed people go? They did not go into jobs because employed doesn't go up. So what's happening? Well, as you can see, DW and MA are going up by 2. So what happened is we had 2 million unemployed people give up on looking for jobs, and hence the discouraged workers went up by 2 million. All right, so that causes the unemployment rate to go down, but because we're still including discouraged workers in the broader rates, notice that that does not cause U4, 5, or 6 to go down. They are all the same as they were in the original situation. So this is a decline in the unemployment rate that's not reflecting an improvement in the labor market necessarily. So you want to gauge that U3 rate against all the other rates when you're sizing up this situation. All right, now here's another alternate scenario where unemployment goes down to 8%. So that's a 2 percentage point decline. That looks pretty good. Let's size it up though and make sure we know what's happening, what's driving that. Okay, so in this case, the unemployed has gone from 10 to 8. Where have those 2 million unemployed people gone? Well, we can see here employed has gone up to 92. So they have indeed gotten jobs. DWMA have stayed the same as they were initially. PTR is the same. So what is going to happen to the broader rates here, U4, 5, and 6? Well, you can see that they've all gone down as well, roughly by the same amount, roughly two points each. Right, so you want to look at all the rates together to assess the change in the main rate.
Now, with that in mind, let's go back to the current data for the set of all 6 unemployment rates, and we can kind of look at these trends over time and try to size them up. So U3 overall unemployment, if we go back a year ago, it was way down to 3.1%, which is like near the all-time low. It's almost never been that low. So it almost has nowhere to go from there but up. And it has gone up quite a bit. It's gone up almost a full percentage point. We're knocking on 4% store right now. So that's trending up over the last year. Is that necessarily indicating like doom for the economy and that we're about to go into a recession? Not necessarily. Although, as I mentioned before, there are some analysts who say, oh, this is a significant increase in the unemployment rate, and that's portending a recession. So we'll just have to keep watching and see. So it's not good news necessarily. It's not good news, but it's not necessarily terrible news. Barely any change in that very narrow U1 long-term unemployment rate. That was 1.2% a year ago. It's now 1.3%. So not much to see there. U2 job losers, that has gone up quite a bit from 1.4 to 1.9, and it was as high as 2% last month or a month before. So that's a pretty significant rise. So that also could be kind of a recessionary sign. Job losers, that'd be corporations laying off workers, which is always kind of sign of recession. So that might be negative news right there. U4, discouraged workers, and 5, those have also been kind of trending up in the last month. Well, they've been kind of flat in the last couple months, but from a year ago, we went from 3.3 here to 4.1. So that's a pretty significant uptick. U5 went from 3.9 to 4.8, pretty big move there. And then finally, U6, that broader, that underemployment rate, part-time workers and discouraged workers, or rather marginally attached. So that went from 6.1 to 7.4. So that's a pretty significant, way more than 1 full percentage point there. So I would say I'm kind of suggesting here, I don't want to be too firm with any like forecast or analysis, but it does look like economists call this a labor market softening. It's not necessarily doom and not necessarily recession, but the labor market's not as strong as it was a year ago or more. Okay, so now we'll look at a few other indicators of unemployment and labor force to round out our discussion here. And the first one is labor force participation. I think I mentioned this earlier. Simply the percentage of the adult non-institutionalized population who are working or looking for work. So that's the calculation for the labor force, which you'll recall is the total unemployed and employed, divided by that adult non-institutionalized population. So I got those numbers for our most recent press release from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, April 24, and that was 161.5 in the labor force divided by 268 adult non-institutional population for a labor force participation of 62.7. Now, is that good or bad? Well, it depends. So first off, we want to look at the trend over time. But then even if that trend is going down, we want to say, well, what's driving that? Because it could be good reasons. Right? It could be people deciding, hey, I can retire. I don't need to work full time. So not necessarily bad news. It could be people giving up. We'd have to dig beyond just the headline number, even if we do see a trend, and try to figure out what's driving it. So we can see some strong trends over time. I'm going all the way back to about post-World War II, so late 1940s here. And we see, first off, well, in the first few decades post-World War II, it was pretty flat, around 59, 60%. And then starting in the later 1960s, it trended way up, very steadily, all the way up until the 1990s. So we're going from about 59% to 67%. So what is that? Plus 12 percentage points over this roughly 30-year period. Stays pretty flat at about 67% here through the 90s, early 2000s. We have this recession in 2001. We see a little bit of drop off, stabilizes again in the later 2000s. Then in the recession of 2008, 2009, this really drops off a lot. So we go from 66% to 63%. And 3 percentage points doesn't seem like a lot, but that's like millions and millions of people, maybe tens of millions. So big drop off here, stabilizes again. You all probably know what's going on right here in 2020. That's your COVID recession, massive decline there, very sharp. But then it starts recovering very rapidly once those COVID lockdowns were lifted and things started kind of getting back to normal, in 2021 or so. So you can see all these trends. So like, well, what's going on here? Well, pretty easy to parse this. What's going on starting in the late 1960s and then peaking in the 1990s? This big uptrend here, this is largely driven by women entering the workforce in much larger numbers than before. And that trend pretty much kind of tapped out by the 90s, 2000s. These little declines here are recession driven, but this one here is also driven. So this decline, this is largely driven by the beginning of baby boomer retirement. So we have more retired people because the boomer generation was huge, and we're a really wealthy country, and the vast majority of them can and want to retire. And so they do. And so labor force participation drops when a generation starts shifting from the workforce into retirement. So by itself, is this good or bad news? Well, it kind of depends on what your values are and your judgments are about it. And some people have positive things to say about that, and some people might find some negative aspects of that. And that's not really the job of economists per se to try to parse that out, because that depends more on our political judgments or our value judgments or our kind of our view of how the world should work, right? So we can observe these things and know about them, but it's really hard to say whether they're good or bad. And let me just put a finer point on that really quick to think about the impact of retirement. If I look at what's called the prime age labor force participation rate, meaning from 25 to 54-year-olds, you'll notice that it trended up and it peaked at about 84% or so here in circa 1990. And it stayed pretty flat there. It did taper off just a little bit after, here's our '08 recession, but only maybe a couple percentage points. Then it rebounded, and then it fell in COVID, but it rebounded even more. And look, right where we are right here in mid 2024, we are pretty much at the levels we were at 20 years ago, and not much below the all-time peaks here of the late 1990s. So not a huge trend when we narrow in on people who would be outside of that retirement age group. Final thing we'll look at briefly is called the employment to population ratio. And this is also pretty self-explanatory. It's the number of employed divided by that non-institutionalized adult population. So very easy here. We've got 161.5 million people employed. We've got an adult non-institutional population of 268. So that's 60.7%. Good or bad? Again, depends what's going on with the trend and if this is going up or down, what's driving that. And hard to say just on the basis of the data whether that's a good or a bad thing. It depends on a lot of related factors and a lot of judgment calls. But we can look at it and just kind of understand what's going on. You can see this fluctuates largely with the business cycle. So again, over a longer trend, going back to kind of the post-World War II period, World War II ending, here in 1945. So you can see in a recession, this goes down. These gray lines here, of course, if you haven't figured this out already, these indicate times of recession. Okay, so during times of recession, this goes down. After the recession, we go back to strong growth, that goes up. So recession down, growth up, recession down, growth up. Here's our big 1980s economic boom. Brief recession here in 1991, 92. Okay, nice boom in the 90s. Very good economic times in the 90s. I remember them pretty well. Recession here in 2001, pretty minor. Not so strong of a boom in the 2000s. Big recession here in 2008. Big decline. Stagnation for a while. Eventual recovery. Huge decline in this in COVID, but recovers very quickly. And we're not back to where we were pre-COVID. But it's recovering, right?
Okay, so now we hopefully have a pretty good understanding of how we measure both unemployment and employment concepts, so we can look at the data and kind of assess the health of our labor market and whether we're in recession or not. Next lecture, we will take a look at some causes of unemployment and try to understand what's driving unemployment and how we should think about unemployment. Is public policy needed to correct it, or is it part of a natural and functioning market economy? Stay tuned.